If you watch the news, if you read the news, there's a lot of things going on right now. How has it been impacting the land market from what you've seen?
It's a better option to bring the farm to market sooner rather than later because there's some uncertainty coming with these tariffs and what have you.
You are best off to get in when you can and be there when it does go parabolic and jumps up and just ride the flat line. Good morning, Jim. How's it going?
Oh, very good. Thanks for having me today, Jake.
It's always a pleasure. You're one of my favorite Facebook follows or X follows because you are really very active of showcasing different auctions and what the direct sales are. And I really appreciate what you do. And go ahead. We had you on here last year. This is a real brief introduction to who you are in case people didn't catch that next episode. And then I'm going to start hitting you with hard hitting questions here.
Sure, you bet. You bet. Well, Jim Rothermich, I live in West Des Moines, Iowa. I work for Iowa Appraisal, and I'm a land appraiser for Iowa Appraisal. I cover the whole state of Iowa. I do get in some other states, but not very often. My main area is Iowa, and I keep track of all the land auctions in Iowa, and I post those results as they happen. And Iowa is very blessed to have an active land auction market, and I take advantage of that. And I also use all those results for appraisal work. So there's a purpose for that. I just share what I'm picking at, what I'm using to do my job. So also have a website called Land Hero where it's subscription based uh, product that you can access my sales and do your own sale research on Land Hero.
Very cool. That's comps are extremely important for anyone looking to, even if you're looking to buy in the market or you're thinking about potentially selling, knowing where the market's at is obviously paramount in making a good plan on the buy or sell side. So we were just chatting a little bit before. If you watch the news, if you read the news, there's a lot of things going on right now. How has it been impacting the land market from what you've seen?
Land market's just kind of yawning at all this bad news. I can't believe it, but the market's very stable. Um, just seeing some really strong sales. One thing you can gauge how good the Iowa land market is doing is how many sales are $20,000 an acre and higher, and there was three of them last week. Um, so it's just kind of yawning, not too worried about it, and I'm surprised by that because the bad news creates uncertainty, but the market's just rolling right on, just very stable.
Do you feel that it's still a supply and demand issue, meaning there's still more demand than there is supply, or is it what do you think is causing that?
Well, demand there is still a lot of demand to buy land. Um, a lot of farmers still have, good amounts of working capital and they're still wanting to buy land and as well as investors. The buyer pool has shrunk from last year. I have been told that it's just not as deep as the buyer pool has been. Um, I will say, as I keep track of the land auctions, I keep track of the number of acres, and 2022 was the highest number of auctions in as far as acres go that we ever had in Iowa. There was 150,000 acres was sold at auction. So that's off the charts. And then so 2023 was lower and 2024 was lower than 2024 was lower than 2023. So and then as I look at quarter one of this year, it's one of the lowest first quarters we've had since I've been keeping track in 2018. So the amount of land coming to market slowing down. There's no question about that. And there's still a lot of demand there. So it's helping support land prices. There's no question about that. And I would say that's probably keeping the market pretty dang strong when we're having all this negative news.
Hmm.
I watched the weekend shows, the farm shows on our FDTV this weekend, and man, they didn't have anything good to say other than the cattle market, But as far as on the grain side and the hog market, they didn't have anything good to say.
Which is interesting because obviously the commodity prices are not that great. There is definitely just a bunch of uncertainty in the space, but you're saying that the supply has also gone down with the demand, but there's still more demand than there is supply, even though both of those lines on the chart went down. Is that a fair
Yeah,
assessment of that?
yeah. I'd say that's it. Yeah.
What are you seeing? Because you mentioned a couple sales that were over $20,000 an acre in Iowa just last week. What are you seeing on maybe more marginal ground? Is that also still stable? Is that deaccelerating, accelerating, still region specific in the state?
Well, um, I would say the marginal ground's still pretty stable. It's when we start getting the lower quality or maybe riskier properties is where I'm seeing some changes. Um, as I analyze my auction data, and that's what I'm talking about here. When I talk about analyzing data, I'm talking about strictly my auction data. In a stable or a increasing market, we'll see 0 to 3 no sales in a month.
Hmm.
And we're below that. We're at 3 or less in that threshold right now. We've been that way since the first year. So that's one of the signals that's telling me we're pretty dang stable right now. Now, what is the difference now between like last year is the amount of auctions that are sealed bid auctions, sealed bid one chance to bid auctions. That has increased exponentially. And those auctioneers are using that tool because they're not quite comfortable. They might have a lower quality property and they don't want to take that to auction because it could no sale. And that stigma is not good. And these sealed bid auctions avoid that stigma of a no sale.
Hmm.
And so as I, you know, follow up on these sealed bid auctions, the auctioneers won't tell me the results, but they will tell me if it's sold or no sale. They will tell me that most of them are getting sold.
Hmm.
So we're working through that. On I think the lower quality is probably taking some hit, but not much, and they are getting those properties sold. And so and that's how I gauge that is looking at those sealed bid auctions. They are getting them sold, and I guarantee you they had a reserve price when they started with that auction, and they're hitting those reserves. So if there's any part of the market, it's the lower quality stuff that's probably taking a hit, but not much of one.
Is that most common whenever there's a change in from what you've seen over the years, where the marginal ground is an indicator of other potential softenings? Like you have the different levels of quality of soil
Sure.
or quality of ground. It's like, man, if marginal ground is starting to slip, is that any indication of other areas of the market going to follow suit, or are they really not that closely connected?
Yeah, that's where it shows up first
Yep.
is those type of farms, and the good quality stuff. Man, it's been selling really strong, as strong as it's ever been, um, and why is that? Because good farms produce in bad years. That's why. They produce year in, year out, and that's why they can pay that much for those farms, and that's why you don't hardly ever see any price reduction in those, is they produce in bad years.
Hmm. Real quick too. So sealed bids, a sealed bid auction for someone that doesn't understand that. Essentially, I'm assuming the auction companies are doing that because it's a more controlled environment to where it's not a live auction and it's just a lot more of a controlled environment for the sellers. And also, you're asking the buyers, hey, what's the most you're going to pay? We're not going to start at half the value and try to run it up to where we think it needs to be in a live auction setting. Do you think that's the strategy behind that tactic?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is, and that puts a lot of pressure on the buyer because they've got to put in their best price.
Yeah.
And, at an auction setting, sometimes their best price is whatever the last bidder was.
Yep.
And, whereas this setting, they cannot use that. They've got to put in their best price. And they're having success doing that. So they're getting them sold. I don't get the prices until they close, but when they tell me they got it sold, then that tells me they met their reserve. And that's
When's the last time you've seen a sealed bid auction being a preferred method for selling farm ground?
I've never seen it.
Really?
I would say, yeah, it's more prevalent now than I've ever seen it.
Wow.
Um, it probably started last year when the market was starting to decline,
Hmm.
and then it's kind of picked up, um, and it's an effective tool. I think it's an effective tool when your market's going down because you don't know how fast it's going down, and if you got a riskier property, it takes that stigma of a no sale, takes
Yeah.
care of that, fixes that. And but now we're in a stable market and we're still got a lot of them. So I can't explain that. I, we'll see how it goes going forward, but it has increased exponentially.
If you had a personal farm right now and you were going to sell it, what would be your sales method, preferred sales method? And let's
If
just
it's
say, let's.
high quality,
I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle. I'm going to say, um, and maybe even like a 65 CSR2.
um, I'm a big fan of auctions.
Uh-huh.
If it had any issues with drainage and if I had high expectations, I would use the sealed bid auction method. If I had reasonable expectations, realizing, we kind of in a mixed market right now, I would go to auction. But you've got to be prepared on that day that you might not know what happens, so that's how I'd look at that.
What are you seeing with recreational ground in Iowa too? Because I know you primarily focus on agricultural ground, but I know a lot of these auctions are multi-track, where one of them is recreational ground. What trends have you been seeing in year to date, or even in the last 6 months, with some of the data that you've captured?
Yeah, sure. I talk to the guys that sell a lot of recreation ground, and they're telling me it's as strong as it's ever been right now. They said, according to what I'm being told, it was kind of declining there up until the election, and then it seems like once the election happened, people kind of got very optimistic, and there's a lot of demand out there to buy recreational land.
Hmm.
The realtors that I talk to say that they might list a farm and might have multiple offers at full price right now, and they didn't have that a year ago. So very strong. There's still a lot of people out there looking for land to buy from the city to get away from the city and go out and have fun out in the country.
Hmm. What with some of these larger, let's say the $20,000 an acre type tracks that have been really strong sales, have most of those buyers, to your knowledge, been local buyers, adjacent farmers, farmers that are in that township, or are you seeing any sort of influx of outside investment firms coming in and competing on those really high end farms?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Most of the time, it's the local market that
Yeah.
drives that. And the reason why is investors won't pay that much. An investor is more of a disciplined buyer, and they have yield expectations, and the farmers will typically push them out of the market, so to speak. So
Mhm.
there is some investor activity, but most of the time when you see those big prices, it's just local farmers duking it out. And here's the reason why. It's a farmer's hold period could be from 50 to 100 years,
Yeah.
and the heirs to that property, say like if a farmer paid $23,000 an acre for land right now today, that's a high price. There's no question about that. But those heirs 50 years from now will be wondering, why didn't that person, granddad or whoever, buy more land at that price?
Yeah.
That's what they're going to ask. And so that's the way you need to look at it. Um, and that's why they can afford to pay those big prices, is they have just an extremely long hold period, whereas investors, it's probably not that long.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up an interesting description of investors, disciplined buyers, because I do feel that that's really interesting. Because if there was a farm that came up right up for sale right next to my place, I'd be pretty silly about it, because I know it's probably one of my only chances to buy it, and I would not
Right.
be a disciplined buyer within reason. And so that's a pretty significant difference between those two things. But what do you see in the headlines? You see, the $22,000, $23,000 an acre, and it's potentially undisciplined buyers. And I say that loosely because, to your point, that's probably their only chance they're going to get to buy it. And 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're going to look really smart.
Absolutely, absolutely. Be the best investment they ever have, even though they paid a premium. And you can pay more for land that joins you too. So that plays into it as well.
What are some other things that you like? What's the current under the water right now, in your opinion? Looking, we kind of talked about it the last 6 months, year to date, but what's the flow of water underneath the surface right now, in your opinion?
As far as, what do you mean?
The
Maybe
the
I don't
mar
quite.
the land market in general, like moving forward. and getting out a crystal ball, and this is just your opinion, and
Okay.
and it's a fun hypothetical
Okay.
here.
Okay. Yeah, sure, sure. I am surprised how stable it is right now with all the bad news that we're having in agriculture right now. Um, as you know, I keep track of cash rent auctions whenever I can pick them up, and those prices have been very strong. There has
Crazy.
been no weakness at all, and a lot of those leases are 2 to 5 years. And so when I analyze that and see at least it's I just got one that was $587 for 5 years. So yeah, that's an outlier, no question. But it was for 5 years. So that tells me they're pretty optimistic about going forward. And then I've got several that aren't as high as that high, but 400 an acre or whatever in 2 to 3 year terms. So that tells me, well, whoever's making those bids, they're pretty dang optimistic. And the thing with an auction, there was also a runner-up bidder there. So
Right. Yeah.
so there was at least two guys that are pretty dang optimistic about the next 2 3 years. So um, I I don't know how the tariffs and all this is going to play out. The market's just yawning right now about it. Will it affect it? It should, because it kind of creates some uncertainty.
Hmm.
Um, but right now it's not. It just looks like it's just steamrolling ahead, and it looks pretty dang stable going forward. Corn prices have kind of come around. I know they're still below break even, but they were this fall below $4 out in the country, and that was shaking the market up pretty dang good. And
Hmm.
we don't have that right now.
The cash rent auction, the one that was $585 an acre. How good of ground was that? And I assume that was in Iowa.
Yeah, that was in Sioux County, Iowa.
Okay.
Um, that farm was a 90 plus CSR2 farm, very high quality, and so it was high quality farmland, and it was in an area where there's dairy. I think a dairy farm picked that up. But there were still several bidders over $500 an acre for that property. So, and they were hog producers and local producers around there. So I'm sure they needed it for effluent application. But that's one example. I've got several. I don't get a lot of them, but when I do, I mean those results are very strong.
That's just what would you say would be the county average for Sioux County?
Oh, it's like I looked that up, and it was $380 an acre.
Oh my gosh. So it is just drastically higher than what the average is obviously for the county. It's a good farm, but how it doesn't make sense because I'm trying to wrap my head around it of, like we're talking about some of the uncertainties in the market and then to go that much higher above, whatever the average is. And I'm not an expert in this field at all. I'm just kind of looking at it as just an innocent bystander. I'm scratching my head, Jim. So what can we what can we gather from that other than them just being really bullish about the future?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and I analyzed, what data I got this winter and this spring, and paired it up with data I had from last year. There is no weakness at all. And I'm like, how can that be? How can we have input prices as high as it's ever been, and grain prices are below break even. How come it's the market's not adjusting to that? Well, what I picked up just talking to realtors is there's still a lot of working capital out there in farmers' pockets. And, we've only won a year, Pat. We've had, one so year, and it didn't deplete those. So for some of those producers, it didn't deplete those cash reserves.
Mhm.
And so they're still pretty dang strong in cash positions, and they're willing to pay up to get that land for their operations. So that's the only thing I can um, give a reason for it's doing that.
Mhm. I mean, that makes sense. Do you think that's probably it? I'll just ask you. So, do you think that if some of these folks are hoping for rates to drop in the next 6 months, is that potentially part of their equation too? Because I mean, I assume a lot of these operations are utilizing a line of credit of some sort, and it's a lot more than what it was a couple years ago. And is that some sort of a banking hedge that they're hoping that rates do go down? Has that come up in any conversations you've had?
I haven't heard so much talking about rates, but what I hear is the way to look at it. They've got control of the land, and not every year is going to be a bad year. There's going to be some good years. And so they look at it as a way to spread those machinery costs out over more acres. And so they also have acres that they have rented at reasonable prices. So once they do an average, it's over the whole thing, then they're still in line where they're profitable. So, and I see those results, and I post those cash rent auction results and see all those comments, and people say, well, they're going to lose money. They're going to lose their butt doing that. And I'm like, well, I don't believe somebody would sign up to lose money.
For 5
They,
years.
yeah, yeah, right, right. So, they had maybe got lower break even costs. I don't know, but I just don't see somebody signing up to lose money on something. So,
Well, does that mean that a bunch of other cash rent contracts are way under market if 585 or whatever that number was is a competitive and profitable rate? Does that leave you wondering if there's a
oh,
lot
yeah,
more opportunity and
yeah,
upside
oh,
for a
yeah,
lot of other ones?
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the reason why I publish those cash rent auction results is I got so many calls from landlords wanting information because they knew they were under renting their farms and so yeah, it's most farms are under rented if it's privately negotiated, most of them are under rented, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think that the cash rent auctions are going to continue to get more popularity?
I think people like having relationships with their tenant, and so I don't ever seen it being a tool that most farm like land, like the prices are negotiated with land. A lot of most of them are here in Iowa land auctions. I don't see that happening with cash rent
Mhm.
because people like those relationships. But I would like to see it's starting to get more popular. um, I think we need to have so many acres openly negotiated, so at least you know where you need to be at
Yeah.
on your private negotiations. So I think it's going to, the trend is more, but I don't see it being where most of the farms are going to be that way because landlords like having those relationships with their tenants. But I think it has a place to know because it tells you where you need to be at in the marketplace.
Yeah, I imagine it could potentially be more popular with absentee landowners too, where they moved, maybe they live in another state and they still have the farm, and they don't have as closely tied roots. It's not like the farmer's their neighbor and they live on the farm.
Right,
I
right,
could see in those
right.
scenarios it could get more popular, which I really have no opinion on it, but it is interesting to where if that same parcel they just they called all those farmers, "Hey, we're gonna cash rent this out." How much less do you think it would have been the settled price if it was not actually an auction? There's no way they would have got 585 an acre.
Yeah, well, I looked at those bid. I seen the bids. This was a county owned farm, and they reported all the bids. So most of the bids there was by several producers was in the $400 range. And then they started dropping out at the upper end of $400. So when I look at that data like that, where I see where most of those people were bidding and where they started falling out at, then that's probably where the market was at.
Mhm.
And then once they got past 500, then it was just between two producers and they were just duking it out. So I would say, it was probably be in the $400 range. So it is probably rented over $100 an acre premium.
Wow. What with some of your appraisal work in the past, what's a big old black eye for a farm that impacts the value, maybe the highest of
Sure.
um, whatever the scenario is?
Drainage, there's no question. That's easy. Drainage.
Mhm.
In Iowa, especially in these glaciated soils, they've got to have tile. And if that farm doesn't have enough tile, it's if it's a wet farm, it really affects it.
Mhm.
And it can have, a high CSR2 of, say like 90. If it doesn't have good drainage, you got nothing. I don't want to say you got
Yeah.
nothing. It really affects it,
So it's
So
worth the investment for someone to potentially do that.
Absolutely. Oh, it pays big dividends, and then you get all the tax benefits that putting that tile in as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. What if what do you think the market ends this by the end of the year? Do you think it's going to still remain stable? Do you think there's a potential acceleration, deceleration? I mean, obviously, we're playing fun here, but that's the question that everyone always has. And if someone's sitting on the sidelines, this podcast caters to a lot of new landowners, aspiring landowners, more towards recreational ground, but everyone wants to buy at the perfect time,
Yeah.
and that is
Sure.
impossible. But everyone wants to do that. So
Right.
you know, that's one question, and the second layer of that question in my head is with the 2025 land market, April 2nd, is it reminiscent to any other period of land since you've been paying attention? Like, man, this feels a lot like 2012, or man, this feels a lot like whatever insert year.
You know, that's a loaded question, Jake. Um, so I'm just going to say, when I see these cash rent auctions and they're for 2 to 5 years and they're just strong as it was last year or year before, that tells me going forward we're going to have a pretty stable market. And so will these tariffs affect things? It's not right now. It could. It absolutely could. But right now, it seems like it's rolling right along. And based on those cash rent results I've got that are 2 to 5 years, it seems it's going to be pretty dang stable.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what I'd say. I would say it's going to continue stable. Um, when we hit COVID, the market shot up um, or a little over 50% in less than 2 years. And based on my analysis of my auction data, we're only down 10% from the absolute peak in that time period. So we've still gained 40% increase since pre-COVID. So I think it's still a good time to sell a farm right now. I think if you're thinking of selling in the short term, I think it's a better option to bring the farm to market sooner rather than later because there's some uncertainty coming with these tariffs and what have you.
Mhm.
Um, so uh, as far as what this year looks like from past years, in the 2012 2013 run up, uh, that market dropped 20% from the peak, and then it flatlined up until COVID. And so it seems like we're kind of in that flatline period right now.
Mhm.
Um, Now I thought, this fall we're going to drop 20% just based on historical what happened in the past from the last run up. We dropped 20% flatline. That's what I thought was going to happen. We only dropped 10%, and it seems like it's flatlined right now.
Mhm.
So
Isn't that something? And to the point of people trying to time the market, uh, it's a ginormous jump. I mean, 50% in a couple of years that's a ginormous jump in an asset class of this size. But then it flatlines for a very long time, and it's almost I'm just deducting from this information. It's like you are best off to get in when you can and be there when it does go parabolic and jumps up, and just ride the flat line.
yeah, right, right, exactly, exactly. Well, if you bought land, there in say 2015, 2016 up to COVID, man, you'd be 40% ahead right now today if you would have
Hmm.
bought back then. Um,
Hmm.
so I think there's some buying opportunities. I think if you do your research and there's going to be some opportunities. Um, you know, just talking to the realtors, there's we're in this wealth change right now, and so these people that are inheriting these farms, they're finding out what they're worth, and a lot of them are wanting to get them sold.
Hmm.
So I think do your homework, and there's going to be some opportunities out here to buy land. I'm not saying you're going to get it at prices pre-COVID, but definitely less than from the peak, and that's a good buy.
Yeah. Out of I'm gonna make this up. Out of 100 auctions that you pay attention to, what percent out of the 100 do you say, yeah, that was a really good deal?
Uh, well, last fall there was it was Probably 25-30% of it I thought
Oh,
were
wow.
good deals.
Yeah.
Um, right now, uh, 10% maybe.
So about 1 out
Mm,
of 10 auctions you
yeah,
feel is a quote unquote good deal.
yeah.
That's really interesting. Do you feel that what about so I'm just trying to build the delta from the ag market to the recreational market because that's where a lot of these listeners are more focused on. Have you noticed any trends of agricultural values fluctuating to recreational pieces of ground? Like, is there any cross indicators between those two different types of land?
Um, uh, I can't say there is, because the farmers just drive that crop production market so hard. Um, I do think it was interesting as I talked to my rec realtors. They said that market was kind of choppy last year, and it was trending lower. Maybe even going down 10%. And then, as soon as we got through the election and started getting through the first of the year, they said, man, it just really changed. Attitudes were a lot different, and they picked up that 10%. And and I was surprised to hear how much money there's still in the city, um, from those urban buyers is willing to come out here and buy this land out here for recreation. There sounds like there's just still a lot of cash out there available for that.
Yeah, that was the same thing I saw here in Illinois. I would say during the summer, it was summer to October was there were some pretty good deals. Definitely felt like a softening of the market. And then shortly after the auction or the election results, I mean, there was a major boost in confidence in buyers that I was working with. And there was a couple tracks in my area that kind of reset the market for recreational tracks. And I haven't seen really too many since then reaffirm those new market trends. So that's kind of what I've seen. And right now, and maybe it's me dumping this on the clients, but like also uncertainty, I feel is something that is a lot more common in conversations that I'm having on a weekly basis.
Yeah, yeah. Just with the general economy,
Yeah,
uncertainty with that. Yeah,
yeah,
sure,
yeah.
sure.
That's what I've picked up. But it's constantly a moving target, and that's the fun and exciting part. I'm sure of your job too. Is it's never stagnant. There's something always changing, and there's always a new auction, and you always get to try to draw whatever information you can out of every single sale to build a true market trend from a lot of sales instead of just one offs.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jake. When we hit COVID, um, I remember. I sent out my newsletter once a month, and I was talking about in my newsletter, this is not good. This is going to affect the land market big time. Button your chin strap up because this is going this ain't good, and we don't know what's going to happen. Meaning going south.
Yep.
And so as those auctions started happening, it was like, well, that wasn't that bad of a sale. That there was no effect on that. And then as we kept going through it, it was like, holy cow, that farm sold really good. And then we started setting price records. And
Yeah.
then it was one price record after another. And then if it wasn't for auctions, we'd have never known where the top of the market was at. It was moving so fast.
Yeah.
And so, um, and if I wasn't watching that market at that time, I wouldn't have believed it. There's no way a market can move that fast, but it was, and we had the results. And so that's how much I know. I thought a market was going to tank, and it just absolutely shot up like we never seen before. So,
Mhm.
um, it's just amazing how resilient the land market is. It is just one tough cookie, and it really handles these um, shocks to the system very well, and I expect it to continue.
Do you th- what do you think caused that massive jump in land during that period? Do you think it was uncertainty in the space, so they wanted to investors wanted to put money into something that was stable, a hedge against inflation because it was a high inflationary period? What do you think actually caused that?
All
Um,
the above, all the
yeah,
above. And then
Yeah.
we had investors showing up out of nowhere wanting to buy ground, and just everybody just thought it was the best investment out there.
Mhm.
I remember back then of these new players that were showing up, buying big chunks of ground, like, people from New York City, in this market buying land and paying up for it.
Mhm.
And so that was some really interesting times. It's not as those investors aren't as active as they are now because there's alternative investments out there now. But boy,
Mhm.
back then they was wanting to get in that land space bad.
Do you think if that whatever happens with the tariffs, and I'm so undereducated on this topic, so I'm apprehensive to even ask this because I don't know if I'll ask it in a fair way. But do you think if the tariffs create an inflationary or increase inflation, obviously they're trying to reduce inflation right now, but if tariffs do increase inflation, do you think that would be an indicator of land prices accelerating again?
It could, absolutely could. Because land is a hedge against inflation. So absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely could.
That's fascinating. Is there any do you have any fun old appraisal stories or anything crazy or a farm that you remember out of all the ones you've done of just like a really unique or obscure farm that was maybe a nightmare to appraise, but you look back and you kind of laugh at it now?
Oh, there's several of those around. I couldn't find which one. What interesting things I do get into is splitting farms up between family members. Right now I'm working on a large estate, and the family member, the heirs, are wanting to split the farms up, and trying to get everybody to agree to the splits is it takes something to do. I'll tell you that. Um, so yeah, yeah.
How do you do that? And I'm sure it's different every time. Is it because okay, so there's a 160, there's four children or four heirs of the estate, and they want to split it into 440s, but 140 is worth a lot more than another 40. Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, that does happen. They'll want it, divided up in kind, and so sometimes I'm a referee in a partition action, and so I'll kind of split it up how I think, and then if somebody gets a property that's worth more than the other ones, then they would owe ovalty, which is means true up,
Mhm.
so they'd have to pay the other people to make that equal. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Those are probably fun. Those are probably fun to
Yeah.
handle. Yeah.
Well, it's if I get in, it's because they can't agree and somebody filed a petition action, and so it can get pretty dicey because people have different thoughts, and but you get appointed a referee and you do the proposal, and most of the time the judge will say, well, that's what he said, so that's what we're going to go with. If you guys can't agree, then
Yeah.
so yeah.
How often do you run into this? Let's say a farm is in the southern half of Iowa and it's a farm piece of tillable ground and it's not great soils. But they remember maybe they went to your website and they saw a sale that was north of $20,000 an acre. Their ground is not worth that. But in their head, that's farm ground, that's farm ground. Why is ours worth $7,000 an acre and that's worth seven or $20,000 an acre?
well
How do you go through that education process? Because I'm sure you
well
run into that all the time.
I'll educate them up front. If you think, that's not according to the data I have, and if you think it's worth that much, then you need to find another appraiser. And then I'm the one that makes those decisions
Mhm.
on what the farm's worth. And and I've got more sale data, good sale data than anybody, or as much as anybody. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I do. And sometimes, I'll turn the job down because they've already got in their mind what that farm's worth. And I just talking to them, I can tell they're not going to listen to what I got to say.
Yeah.
So that has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything else here, Jim? I appreciate your time and I appreciate your expertise because I know you keep such a close pulse on the land market, and I always get a lot of able to glean a lot of information from just what you're seeing going on. And although I'm in Illinois, I still want to pay attention to what's going on over in your neck of the woods. And I just really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you can think of that people should know as they go into quarter two, quarter three, quarter four of 2025?
Yeah, just take all this bad news that we're getting right now. Just realize that, it might be getting hyped up by the ag media. And as auctions happen, that's going to tell you what people are thinking. And if I'm saying there's a lot of no sales, people are not handling it very well. But if I'm saying the market's stable, we're rolling right on, then the market's saying it's really not that big a deal. So
Mhm.
that's what you need to know, and the market will tell us. And right now, it's just solid as oak.
I'll be darned. Yeah. Well, I think a big part of it is negative keywords and negative news always gets way more attention than positive news. So I feel that, maybe it creates an echo chamber that's maybe not fair to what's actually going on.
Yeah, sure, sure. And one other thing I'll say, I get asked a lot by people like, how many farm, or I do a post and it's got those big prices. And people will comment on it like, well, I bet the Chinese bought that farm, or how many farms are the Chinese buying? I don't know of any Chinese buyer in Iowa. I have not heard that one time.
Mm.
I don't know if they could compete with the local farmers, to be honest with you. But I don't know of any, and
Yeah.
that has been overhyped, in my
Mhm.
opinion, the Chinese buyers. It's not happening here in Iowa. I can't speak to other places, but it's not happening here in Iowa.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm sure someone would listen to this and would assume that was happening. So I appreciate you sharing that. Where can people? I know you have a handful of different projects going on. Where can people go find everything that you have going on?
Well, if you wanna follow me on social media, my, Twitter handle's, the Land Talker, and I post auction results on a daily basis as I get them. I have a newsletter that's a free subscription that goes out first business day of the month. You can sign up for that. Go to www.iowaappraisal.com, and that comes to you through the email. And I put some narrative with that of what I've picked up talking to farm auctioneers, and it's got all the results in that month, um, as well as cash rent auction results. I also have Land Hero, www.landhero.us. It's a subscription based model that you can go and access very high quality comps. And, like we was talking earlier, having good comps is very important. Well, I've got very high quality comps or arm's length transactions. And so it would save you a lot of time trying to find good comps. So that's how you do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate it as always. And we'll have to chat again here soon. I'll independently watch the market, and I'll be following you on Twitter to see what to see what you have going on. And I really appreciate it once again.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jake.